Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us for our virtual town hall. We will wait for a few minutes just to allow a few more people to join. So just wanted to give you that, to let you know that our session is being recorded and we will offer the session afterwards. But we will start in a few minutes just to allow more people to enter. So thank you. All right, we will start our session in exactly 1 minute just to allow a few more people to enter. But again, thank you so much for joining us for this important conversation. All right, perfect. Good afternoon. Happy Wednesday, everyone. Happy Hump Day. My name is Joel Buno, and I am the Executive Director for Louisville's Asia Institute Crane House. Thank you, panelists and registrants and guests for joining us for this very important discussion. This virtual town hall would not have taken place without the efforts of my two awesome fellow cohorts, Xiaoyan Zhao, Executive Director of the World Affairs Council of Kentucky and Southern Indiana, and Sabine Nassim, Director for Louisville Metro's Office for Globalization, a division of Louisville Forward. Thank you, Xiaoyan and Sabine, so very, very much. This session will be recorded and will be available after our presentation ends. So please be on the lookout for a notice from the World Affairs Council for that. We have a lot to discuss today, but before we start, it is my pleasure to introduce Mike Mall with PNC Bank, title sponsor for our virtual town hall, to start us off with a few words this afternoon. Mike, it's all you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Joel, and thank you everyone for being here. I thought it appropriate that on the agenda it says it's my duty to welcome everybody, because that's what we're talking about today. How do we make our community as welcoming and accepting as possible? And today, specifically within the Asian community in the Louisville metro area. So our message is simple. Thank you. PNC is all about diversity, inclusion, and conversations like this are how we make that happen. We need to talk about things, we need to share, we need to be transparent. And we're just happy that everybody's able to join us today. I want to thank all of our panelists today for being willing to stand up and be out there and take the hard questions, and let's all share and make this community the kind of community we all want to live in. So thank you very much, Joel, and thank you, everybody. And I'm now going to join the rest of the crowd and listen to this wonderful event.
Well, thank you so much, Mike, and thank you, PNC Bank, so much for your support. Now, please, we have a lot to discuss today, so please let me direct your attention to my fellow cohort, Sabine Nassim, to introduce a special speaker for this afternoon. Sabine.
Thank you, Joel. Hello, everyone. I'm Sabine Nassim, and I'm the Director for the Office for Globalization. Some of you on this call already know that the Office for Globalization was created by Mayor Fischer with the main goals to welcome immigrants into our community and help advance economic, educational, and cultural opportunities that benefit everyone. We provide resources for our immigrant and refugee families to go to school, build a career, start and run a business. We strive to connect with immigrant and refugee communities, build a globally welcoming culture, and provide equitable access to city and community resources and services. So it is with this understanding that we were able to have the great pleasure to collaborate with the Crane House Asia Institute and World Affairs Council to co-host today's powerful learning opportunity to spotlight the Asian American and Pacific Islander voice in support against discrimination, hate, and violence experienced across the nation. And it is with this dedication that Mayor Fischer wanted to provide a few remarks. Although he isn't able to join us in person today, I hope his unwavering commitment to this work is reflected in the video he recorded recorded in advance of our discussion today. Thank you. Give me just 1 second.
Good afternoon, everybody. Mayor Greg Fischer here. I want to say thank you to everybody for watching and being a part of this important conversation. The surge of violence we've seen against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders across America has been deeply upsetting. Totally unacceptable against the values to which our nation aspires, and it must stop. Asian Americans have made remarkable economic and cultural contributions to our nation and to our city. Recently, I was able to experience their entrepreneurial spirit and the diversity they bring to our city when I visited Annie and her son Lee at Annie's Cafe, the Burmese community leader Zal Raha and his beautiful family at their Asian market in Woodlawn, and the Tran family who took over Gerard's hardware store, a staple in Beachmont. As workers, business owners, and consumers, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders frequently contribute more than their numbers would suggest. The violence and hate they have experienced and continue to see even today are the opposite of what we need if we're to overcome this tragic pandemic and build back better as a community of equity, of fairness. And so to our Asian American and Pacific Islander communities, Louisville stands in solidarity with you. Remember, Metro government is here to serve. That includes reaching out to the Human Relations Commissions if you're the victim of discrimination, and our police if you're the victim of a hate crime. I want to thank all of the partners who pulled this town hall together. Have a great discussion, and let's keep this conversation going as we all stand against hate. Thank you.
Thank you. Xiaoyan?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor Fischer and Sabine, for your messages of support. My name is Xiaoyan Zhao. As Joel mentioned, I'm the Executive Director for the World Affairs Council of Kentucky and Southern Indiana. We're located in Louisville, Kentucky. We are a regional hub for international exchange, dialogue, and learning. So this is the kind of conversation that we really like to have, and we are really delighted to be a partner on this program today. So before we dig into the conversation, I just want to do a quick reminder to everyone that's attending today. Please feel free to submit your questions using the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen, and then use the chat for any comments you have. We really encourage you to be candid, but please also be respectful in your comments as well. Now to our panelists today, if you would very briefly introduce yourself and how your agency is connected to the issue we're discussing today. So we're going to start with Assistant Chief McClinton, if you will do a quick introduction of yourself.
Good afternoon. I am Andy McClinton. I'm the Assistant Chief of Louisville Metro Police Department. I'm over our support bureau. LMPD is responsible for investigating crimes and reporting crimes motivated by bias toward any individual's actual or perceived race, ethnicity, ancestry, religion, sexual orientation, disability, gender, or gender identity. It is the policy of LMPD to protect the rights of all individuals, regardless of their actual or perceived race, ethnicity, ancestry, religion, sexual orientation, disability, gender, or gender identity. Thank you.
Thank you. And next to Special Agent Robert Brown with the FBI, please.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to speak on hate crimes. I definitely consider it an honor. Investigating hate crimes is one of the FBI's top criminal priorities. You know, when there's an attack on a victim, it's really more than that. It's an attack on the entire community. It's a message sent to intimidate and threaten and then subvert a community. That's why it's our top priority. But here in Kentucky, we're very fortunate in that we have FBI agents, analysts, and LMPD detectives working side by side investigating hate crimes through the Public Corruption Civil Rights Task Force, which hate crimes is under the umbrella of the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Program. In addition, we have the Joint Terrorism Task Force and the Hate Crimes Fusion Cell. So I look forward to answering some more of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael Aldridge with ACLU, please.
Hi, I'm Michael Aldridge, Executive Director of the ACLU of Kentucky. The ACLU has a three-pronged approach to our work. We use public education to build support for public policy initiatives. We lobby the Kentucky General Assembly to pass those initiatives, and we have a legal department to take action against government overreach. Thanks for having us today.
And Rachel Enger.
Hello, everybody. My name is Rachel Enger. I'm the Education and Outreach Coordinator at the Louisville Metro Human Relations Commission. The Human Relations Commission has the authority to enforce anti-discrimination law in housing, employment, public accommodations, and hate crime. We also provide certification to businesses belonging to people of certain protected classes to increase their visibility in the community. And we ensure public access to civic engagement activities, and we create events with community partners, like some of us here today, to bring diverse groups of people together that promote unity and understanding for a more supportive and equitable society.
Thank you. And then last but certainly not least, Jody Duncan with Louisville Metro 311.
Hi, thank you so much for having me today. It's such a pleasure to be here. Again, I'm Jody Duncan. I'm with the Louisville Metro Emergency Services, which includes 911 and 311. Metro Safe is 911, and they'll take your emergency and non-emergency calls. And 311 does anything with Louisville services, any kind of services throughout the community. So again, thank you so much for having me here today.
Thank you, Jody. That must have been a very important call in the back. You're multitasking as you're speaking with you. So thank you so much for joining us. So thanks everyone for being part of this panel. So I want to get, just start with the basics of why we are here today. So we all know that Asian discrimination has been on the rise and really came to prominence in the last several months with a series of violent acts that's been very nationally prominent against Asians across the US. But as you will hear today, the statistics and actual reported cases tell a much more complicated story. So before we dig into the issues of criminality and process, let's discuss who we are actually talking about when we say Asian Americans and AAPI. So according to the US Census, Asians are classified as having origins in any of the original people, so the Far East, Southeast Asia, or the Indian subcontinent, including but not limited to China, Japan, Thailand, Malaysia, Korea, India, Cambodia, Vietnam, or the Philippines. Pacific Islanders are people whose origins belong to Polynesia, Micronesia, and Melanesia. And this classification also includes, but not limited to, Native Hawaiian, Samoan, Tahitian, Guamanian, Fijian, and Papua New Guinea people. So with that, Joel, if you can start off us and tell us a little bit more about the Asian community in Louisville and more broadly in Kentucky today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cheyenne. It'd be my pleasure. Question I get asked a lot is, please tell me about the Asian community in Louisville. And I do have to say, like many communities, we're not a monolithic group. But I'd like to give everyone some background on what the population looks like here in Louisville and in the state of Kentucky. So I'm sharing my screen here. The flags that we have here represent the top groups, the top Asian groups that we have represented here in the Louisville Metro. Top left is the flag of India. Top right is the flag of China. The flag of Vietnam. Bottom left is China. The middle there is South Korea. And the bottom right is my country, the Philippines, my home country, the Philippines. So if you look at Louisville Metro's statistics for a country of birth, you can see that Cubans and Mexicans, which we consider part of the Americas, is the greatest group of immigrants here, or people not born in the United States. Follow very closely to Indians, and we say Indians. We mentioned that we classify those as Asian Indians. Next, we have the Vietnamese, the Filipinos, and the Chinese. And also the Koreans and the Iraqis are also considered Asian. So if you look, those are the numbers that we have represented within the Asian community. Metro Louisville's population is somewhere around 1.2 million, 1.3. This is based off of numbers from 2019, which Asians make about 34,000% of the population, which is roughly about 2.7% of the Louisville Metro population. So basically what I'm getting out of this graph is there are not many of us out there, but we do comprise a portion of the community, and we do contribute a lot to our community. Continent of birth, you can see, of course, Americas is the greatest group of foreign born here in Louisville Metro, but Asians are right there, following closely second. Foreign born by origin, you can see again, immigrants from the Americas are great, but Asians are still probably the second and quickly becoming one of the strongest foreign born origins here in the United States. So let's look at the state of Kentucky. If you look at that, our total population in the state of Kentucky is roughly about 4.4 million, which 59,593 compose the Asian community. So really less than 2% in the state of Kentucky. So when people ask if there have been any reported cases of Asian hate here and why the numbers are so low, that may be one of the factors as to why the numbers are so low. But that's not the only factor, and we'll discuss that later on as we go through the conversation. So thank you, Xiaoyan. You're on Zoom, Xiaoyan. I'm in mute, excuse me.
Okay, there we go. Multitasking. Sabine, did you have anything else to add to that? We'll talk more about the actual cases and all of that later, but we know that the cases numbers are very low or not there, but have you all heard more from the communities, even anecdotally, of some kind of increase in cases of Asian discrimination in various settings?
Yeah, so, to what Joel mentioned in your point, Cheyenne, there hasn't been anything reported, right? And we'll hear from LMPD and we hear from FBI around those reports and what's discrimination and what's a hate crime, but we haven't seen reports, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist because anecdotally, we do hear stories. We do hear from our friends. We do hear from our community members that they have experienced this. In fact, for myself, Pakistani-born immigrant, after 9/11, there was a number of emotions. There was a number of hate crimes. There was a number of violence that occurred, whether it was here in Louisville or around the nation. We see things that have been occurring against our Japanese communities, things that have been occurring against our Chinese, our Vietnamese, Filipino. A lot of our Asian American communities are seeing it across the nation. But then at the same time, we also know that a lot of our Asian American families and friends don't know if it's worth reporting, don't know what they should report, don't know within their own culture if this is something they should speak out about. So while we are now bringing this to the surface and talking about it, doesn't mean it hasn't ever existed, that it's just now we're seeing an uptick in it. What we're really seeing is an uptick in the conversation and bringing this to and spotlighting this, because this has occurred, this has been occurring, hate crimes and violence and the discrimination has been occurring for a number of years, but the reports aren't there for a variety of reasons, which I know our panelists will talk about today. And again, to Joel, some of the statistics he showed, that does include, our Vietnamese and Filipino and Chinese and Indian and Korean families, but also includes our Nepalese families, our Thai families, those that live in Myanmar and in Pakistan like myself, or in Japan or Laos or Indonesia, a lot of those families as well, which may be minimal here in Louisville or in Kentucky even, but it is seen, we do hear about it.
And one thing I'd like to add really quickly is there have been cases of microaggressions that have been happening within the Louisville metro community, especially from a lot of the South Asian communities, a lot of the communities where it's traditional to wear hijabs or things like that. But one thing I would like to add, one of the reasons why there has been a lot of low reporting nationally, from what I understand, is that Asians tend to follow that model minority myth where we go to work, we don't cause a lot of waves. And so I'm very excited for this conversation to learn from our law enforcement and to teach you in the community how to report a hate crime. Again, just because it's not reported doesn't mean it's not happening. So that's what I'd like to say. And I'm excited for everyone to learn how to identify what a hate crime is and how to report it. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great segue. Thanks for both of you making those lots of really interesting points. And that really leads us to the heart of this, right? What is considered a reportable case? I think most of the people in the community are not really sure, you know, if a person has a complaint or believe that some kind of racial discrimination has occurred, whether it's in the at the workplace, in school, public venues, you know, how should they address that? What should they do? So, you know, there's a lot involved in terms of, you know, what is the process? What's the range of crime and criminal, what's considered as a crime? So if we can get that conversation started with, maybe let's start with Rachel. You had mentioned that, what do you do and how does your agency help with that?
So within housing, employment, public accommodations, and hate crimes, there are certain harms that we look for to be able to take a complaint and investigate that and seek some sort of outcome. So if we want to talk hate crimes specifically, you know, we're looking at battery, assault, infliction of mental distress is on the list, intentional interference with property of another person, trespassing, damaging, defacing, and destroying property, real or personal. Those things, when they happen, you know, when we're talking about crime, they're more obvious. And they can be reported criminally, which, you know, our other guys will talk about, but they can also be reported to our office as discrimination. So they can do both. And when it comes to housing, employment, and public accommodations, we look for other harms, like for public accommodation is denying a public service or accessibility. You know, if somebody says, I don't like you, I don't want you in my store, being denied access to goods and services, facilities, advantages that other people have, and just general accommodation within a public place. You know, and employment, we're looking at harms like sexual harassment, suspension, termination based on your protected class. And with housing, refusal to deal, sell, rent, denying full use, false information, harassment, intimidation, terms and conditions, and reasonable accommodations or modifications.
Jody, did you want to add to that with Metro Call?
Certainly. Thanks so much. You know, Metro 311 is here for anything that you need to know about Louisville Metro government. So let's say you don't know where Rachel is and you don't know how to get in touch with her office, you call Metro 311. And what we're going to do is we're going to put you forward to whomever you need. And we might even have some other things in our database that's going to allow you to report that to someone that you would like to, most certainly.
Mm-hmm. When people report, I mean, how should they be prepared in terms of evidence? What do they need to have with them to be ready to make a report like that? And then also an audience and ask, you know, in regards to the process and the length of investigation. I mean, what does the follow-up look like? Someone had mentioned that, you know, they've filed a police report before, but they've received no follow-up afterwards. So maybe Assistant Chief might be able to talk about that.
Okay, so I guess just to clarify, you want to know kind of the process of the investigation?
Yeah, the process, what they should have with them when they make such a report to make sure that, you know, they're credible, and you know, what the follow-up look like.
Sure, I think kind of start from the beginning just so we can clarify a few things. Because there's different laws, and I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. From a police standpoint, first and foremost, you were talking about reporting it. If you have to call the police, if it's an emergency and the person is there and you feel scared, threatened, intimidated, and that person is there, persons are there in front of you, please call 911. Call 911, get the police started, and we will get there. If it's not an emergency and it's something that happened prior, it happened after, or they're not there, we do have a non-emergency line, call Metro Safe. It's 502-574-71111. And please make sure and get a report number. If you call and the police show up and there's certain criteria that have to be met, and I'm going to cover that, but just make sure you get a report number because that's kind of what tracks it all. For us, the way it kind of reads is a hate crime is any act or threats of violence, property damage, harassment, intimidation, or other crimes motivated by hate and bias and designed to infringe upon the rights of individuals are viewed very seriously by LMPD and are given high priority. Intimidation could be physical, it could be verbal. Just make sure you can articulate why you felt intimidated. And there are a few things that have to be met before we can report it as a hate crime. Sufficient objective facts must be present to lead a reasonable and prudent person to conclude that the offender's actions were motivated in whole or part by bias. Officers, when they arrive, they will consider the following factors when determining whether a hate crime has occurred. And these are just some of the things. That would be information received from the victim, evidence observed or collected at the scene. Officers will look at any existing criminal patterns in the area, and then information received from the person, the perpetrator that's doing it. Obscene or a threatening phone call that contains racial, religious, homophobic, or ethnic slurs, they are also considered hate crimes. So if someone calls on the phone, that is also could be considered a hate crime. Now, you were talking about kind of the investigation and the process. I'll just give you a kind of a basic rundown of what an officer would do so you know what to expect. When an officer would arrive on scene of a suspected hate crime, they would first, and this is common with any crime scene, make sure that the scene is secure, and then they would have to identify all the parties involved, and they would record any and all statements by the suspects or by whoever on their body cam. And then they do recognize any potential for a need for a translator. We do have that option. And then we would collect and thoroughly document all physical evidence related to the crime, including but not limited to the following things: any type of hate literature, any type of symbolic objects, spray paint cans. We would want to save all of that. The officers would then complete an incident report if those things are met. And we have all this information, and then they would contact their supervisor. They just let the supervisor know that, hey, we have a hate crime here. That is a higher priority for us. Then the supervisor would respond or just verify with the officer everything that they're doing. Once that's determined that let's say it is a hate crime, then that is documented and it's tracked in our records management system as a hate crime. That way we can keep track of it all, and then that is automatically sent to a detective sergeant. The detective sergeant would then assign that case, typically within a few days. On a hate crime, if it is determined, that would get assigned either that night or the next morning, and then a detective would be in contact with the victim. And just a little bit about what to expect once the detective gets in contact with you. We would work with the Commonwealth Attorney's Office to make sure we have a legally sound case from the get-go. So we would reach out to the Commonwealth Attorney's Office. We would coordinate with other departmental units, as well as our state and federal partners, to identify any patterns or see if there's anything else that's happened that we might not know about. We would verify that the appropriate assistance is being provided. We have a victims service unit. We would contact them and put them in contact with the victim. And then if it is determined to be a hate crime, the detectives would contact the Louisville Metro Human Relations Commission to let them know what we're dealing with. I know that's a whole lot of information I just gave you, but that kind of gives an overview. And then if people have more specific questions, I can try and answer them.
I'd love to piggyback on that real quick. I know Colonel McClinton, you had said something about 911. Just don't be fretful or frightened to call 911. And again, 574-7111 is the non-emergency line. You know, we're 24/7, 365, anytime that you feel that you need to call 911, please do. And don't forget, you know, I feel like a lot of times people don't call because maybe they don't think someone will understand or speak whatever language they're speaking. We have a language line, and we both do. LMPD does, and we use that along with them in the 911 service. And if you just tell us what language you speak, we'll make sure we get somebody, and we're going to relay back and forth and help you. That's the point. We want to do anything that we can to help.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that process, obviously, it's much more complicated than, you know, that most people would know. If you have any kind of a follow-up, any kind of a resource of that in easy writing, we love to share that with the audience afterwards. And we're going to be compiling a list of takeaways today. So things like that will be something that will be very helpful for everyone to know. And you know, at this point, I want to bring in the FBI for this conversation. If Agent Brown, if you have anything to add to this, you know, just we're going to be talking more about the number of cases and, you know, what constitutes as a hate crime, which the Assistant Chief have outlined in some detail. And it seems like, you know, is the bar fairly high to meet that hate crime? What would be considered hate crime? Just looking at the number of cases, you know, what compared to other types of crime, how difficult is it for people to know whether this is a hate crime or could possibly report under some other types of crime?
Right, thank you. First, I just want to put stop what Colonel Clinton said, that obviously if something's happening live, to certainly call 911 and LMPD would take that information. And that's definitely the first part of it. And the second part, in a non-emergency situation, we would encourage them to call our 24-hour operations center at 502-263-6000. But really the official layman's term definition of a hate crime, and I'll read it for you, is a crime defined as a criminal act against a person or property motivated in whole or in part by offender's bias against race, ethnicity, religion, national origin, disability, sexual orientation, gender, or gender identity. And for us here locally, you know, one of the most recent tragic examples is really the Kroger shooting, which was, you know, charged both at the state level and the federal level. And that's the good thing about the Public Corruption and Civil Rights Task Force. We're able to leverage both of our authorities, both state and federal authorities. But one of the themes that I think is coming out here is that, and what we've seen over the last year is, you know, across the board, across our country, there's a bit of a mistrust in law enforcement, specifically from the immigrant community or minority community. And we want to you know, really lower those barriers and those things that inhibit people or make them fearful of even coming forward and reporting it. And you know, my position is, you know, when in doubt, report it, and then we can sift through and then work through the victim to, you know, if we're not the right point of contact, we can certainly get them in the right place.
Yeah, I think you point to a really important piece, which is, you know, a lot of immigrants and certainly Asians has you know, there's somewhat of a natural, not so much distrust, but a fear of authority that law enforcement represents in many cases. And so unless something really rises to a level of what they consider crime, most people will not report it, and they will think of other means of resolving. So that piece of, you know, the number of cases, I believe we had the number from LMPD that there's been 0 reports of Asian hate cases since January 2020. And I'll ask maybe one of you, Assistant Chief or Christopher, Agent Bogagan, to talk about that. But does that sound right to you? I don't, you know, I think for all of us listening here, and we talked about earlier, even Joel mentioning that there's a lot of other types of discrimination that must have been missed. And that really points to the fact that a lot of people are not reporting. So if we can just talk about that really, you know, a little bit in depth, how's data collected and how they're reported? we talked a little bit more about what rises to the level of a crime, and perhaps talk about also how many successful cases of what we consider hate crime have been prosecuted in Kentucky across the board. So maybe that's something that is that Agent Brown wants to start, or is that you want to get us started?
Sure. So let's talk about, UCR data, how law enforcement reports, all criminal data. And so of the 18,000-ish agencies that law enforcement agencies out there, that report to UCR, there's about 3,000 that don't. It is voluntary, state, local, federal, and tribal partners. So in 2019, there were roughly 7,300 examples of hate incidents reported. And of those, 158 were targeting Asians. And in Kentucky in 2019, there were 0 reported. However, overall, there were 114 examples of hate crimes reported. Now, there is anecdotal reporting that we have, out there, and, part of the problem could be, the refinement of how the data is actually collected, the questions that are asked. But, the data on obviously is only as good as what you're getting. Obviously, there's fear and mistrust and a concern in the community. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I'll kick it over to you, Colonel McClinton, if you want to just add to that how UCR is tagged at LMPD.
Sure, and Sergeant Gohagan will be able to give you some of the more of the exact numbers on totals. But for LMPD, like I said earlier, if it is recorded as a hate crime, that's how we will mark it. It's called under bias. And we report out monthly to KSP and to the FBI our numbers. And at this point, looking at the last 5 years, we have not had any, we've obviously had hate crimes, but we have not had any reported with the Asian community. And something else, just so everyone will know about the reporting, we do provide open data on any hate crime occurrences. And that would be on our open data portal, which is on our website. And our website is www.louisville-police.org. And all of our crimes are on there. So that's another resource. But we report monthly on anything to KSP and to the FBI. And if Sergeant Gohagan, if you want to kind of talk about the total numbers, if there's anything you can clarify.
Okay. I don't know if you can hear me or not. Yep. Okay. So looking at our numbers that were provided from our crime analytics division, looks like there's been 10 cases that have been reported this year that people believe a hate crime was reported, and that's where the victim believes that they were targeted because of their race. As of right now, those cases are still being investigated by the detectives, and that could be anything from, somebody was contacted and, a racial slur was used, so they believe that a hate crime has occurred. Again, there's been 10 incidents so far this year in 2021, and all of those are being investigated currently and still working through the court system. And as Colonel McClinton had noticed or had mentioned, we've had several cases dating back to 2015 that none have involved in our Asian community as well.
So it sounds like there's been a number of crimes under the hate crimes category reported, just not from Asians. So there's probably some, some real question and issue of understanding and how informed that group as a whole is with not just the process, but just getting out of and feeling comfortable in reporting and what they can report. And just also, one of the things is that maybe there are other things. Do you keep track of what crimes are reported by different minority groups? For example, there's of course domestic violence or, a burglary or those type of things. Are there any tracking of, say, who's reporting on what types of crimes?
Jen, we just posted I just posted the 2019 UCR link in our website, but that's a great question. I don't know that we report on the complainant's ethnicity.
Okay. Yeah, because
we don't have 2020 data yet.
Okay.
Like full data.
So I guess, obviously that question really points to the fact that many people, the idea of what's hate crime seems very, it can be subjective. It's very difficult to meet and to understand what you would need to bring as evidence to meet that barrier. And is it possible that people are reporting under other crimes? So just interesting if there's any kind of information on that and how to kind of moderate those numbers. The other question I want to really quickly touch on is what about cyber crimes, hate crimes? Do you do anything differently? When people post, kind of racially, slurs and certain types of comments and various mediums or platforms, how are those treated? And this goes to anyone. Yes, Agent Brown.
Sorry about that. Oh, didn't hit unmute quick enough. So that's the tricky part of working hate crime. Hate is not necessarily illegal. We have to walk a fine line between all of law enforcement, really, as it relates to free speech, and just some of the elements that we're having to look at to prove in determining whether a potential violation has occurred is the use of force or threat or conspiracy to threaten, vital injury or physical harm, targeting the victim solely really because of actual perceived gender, sexual orientation, race, color, religion, national origin, disability, family status, and the motive, to injure, intimidate, and interfere. But and then you wrap that up into the cyber piece. So, we do bring a host of federal violations, to the picture. So interstate threatening communications is illegal. It is illegal to threaten someone, over the phone or over the internet. But, we have to really look and dissect, is it free speech? Is it a broad threatening statement, or is it you really focused in on the individual?
Anybody want to add to that? No? Okay. Yeah, I think that's really fascinating. Obviously, under the category of hate crime, it seems like it would be very difficult for people to report it as such, possibly under other areas. Maybe we can just pivot a little bit and pivot in terms of, let's look at the slightly larger picture. And here I like to bring in Michael from ACLU to really talk about how, the discrimination, periods of discrimination, they come and go, they rise and fall. And a lot of times they do connect to global events. So Sabine had mentioned in the beginning earlier about how we've seen a very large, sharp rise in various types of violence against Muslims right after the 9/11 cases. And, more further back during the Japanese internment types, period. So Michael, can you talk a little bit about that? But just, how maybe, is there anything to look to kind of give credibility to, a lot of people saying this is because of the rhetoric around the pandemic, how we're really calling it something that people can readily latch onto and just use that as a way to ground their comments.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is a reaction to the pandemic and people overreacting, and a backlash occurs. Like you said, we've seen many times throughout history when national events happen and then there's a backlash. And this is an area where the ACLU plays a part. We shape public policy to protect like whole classes of individuals, or like historically what we're known for is like filing lawsuits for when government overreaches, like infringing on the rights of like a whole group of people. So like in times of national crisis like this, there have been many situations where the government has asked us to sacrifice our fundamental freedoms in the name of national security. Yet the Constitution limits government's power to invade privacy, imprison people without due process, and punish dissent. After 9/11, you mentioned we saw a backlash against Muslim Americans and sweeping new government policies to restrict individual rights. At that time, like the ACLU opposed the Patriot Act. We challenged warrantless spying. We challenged the indefinite detention of terrorism suspects without charge or trial. And you also referred to the Japanese internment, which is one of the most shameful periods of American history. After the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, President Franklin Roosevelt ordered all people of Japanese descent, most of whom were American citizens, be sent to war relocation camps. Eventually, more than 110,000 Japanese Americans were sent to these internment camps. The ACLU, led by its California affiliates at the time, stood alone in speaking out against this atrocity. We filed a lawsuit that we ultimately lost at the Supreme Court. And I repeat that, we lost that lawsuit against interning American citizens on our own land. Now, that was the Korematsu case. And has since been shown to be a great injustice. Korematsu became an example of when government really validated racial discrimination and the uprooting of American citizens. And most recently, it was cited by the courts by Chief Justice Roberts when ruling against President Trump's anti-Muslim travel bans. Basically said we should have learned our lessons by now. We should know that we've made these horrible mistakes and we're not going to repeat that again. And striking down those types of racially motivated attacks on American citizens.
Yeah, I think we had some audiences who submitted some comments ahead of this, just saying, why isn't the media really kind of talking about how the use of, talking about the pandemic, the rhetoric around the pandemic, how that's really contributed to this. And it seems like that has a number of, it's contributed to it. I've looked at a poll recently that, the number of Google searches for, say, the China virus or these kinds of other racial slurred, use terms for around that has really gone up during those different types of months when they've been used the most nationally. So that is something that, yeah, I'm sorry, Michael.
Sorry to interrupt you. I would say I agree with you. There has been media around this, but unfortunately we live in a world now where we select our media sources. So we often live in a bubble of media attention. So I think there have been some media sources who have really tried to shine a light and clarify situations and put some truth to the rhetoric that's out there. And there have been other media sources who contributed to the rhetoric. We have to be really intentional about trying to find, unbiased news sources that are really just reporting the incidents instead of editorializing them. And that's really becoming increasingly difficult to do in our modern age.
Yeah, so true. Very, very true. So looking at the cases and how we generally react when we are confronted with something, generally we are reactive rather than proactive in preventing any kind of violence from becoming a lot more, prevalent. Just wanting your thoughts on what are some things that we can do as a community members, as neighbors, at the workplace, and other groups that, around us to support a much more kind of a supportive, to have a much more supportive environment. We had some audiences who submitted, asking the question of what's the best strategy, for example, handling slur words or racist epithets about Asians that you might hear in public at the grocery store or on the streets. They think that silence condones behavior. Anybody would like to tackle that one? Thoughts?
I'll speak up real quick and allow others to do so as well. But, oftentimes the onus is on those discriminated against or those being mistreated to step up and defend themselves. And quite honestly, we need us as allies, as white people, to step up, to step in, and to call out these situations when they occur. We can't always expect individuals who are being mistreated to have to shoulder that burden all on their own. I think there's a greater responsibility for white allies in the community to step up and speak out.
And I was just going to say, you know, that we all have biases. It's a natural human thing. But when we choose to act on those biases and not confront them and not confront others who are making the choice to turn their biases into action, we're participating. So, you know, we need to be strong enough to stand up for people in situations when we feel safe enough to do so. You know, there are situations where if we do speak up, we're in danger too. You know, that's when we need to call 911 to get assistance or distract a situation that's happening. Or if you can't intervene immediately, check on the person afterwards, stick around and say, you know, are you okay? I saw what happened to you. Do you need help? You know, there are so many ways that you can get involved. You don't have to jump in the middle of the situation and, you know, create chaos, but there are options, you know. We need to be open to looking for those options when we see something.
And Rachel, I'd like to add, we have posted something about what a bystander can do on our Asia Institute Crane House Facebook page. And one thing that you can do to mitigate the situation is not speak directly to the attacker, but the person who's being attacked. Just make sure if you're there, just give them some sense of support. You know, I feel sorry for the young karate young lady in California who was practicing karate and was being attacked, and she felt she was alone. And in a situation like that, instead of going for the attacker, just make sure that the person who's being attacked knows that you're there to support them. And that's something that can really mean a lot for that person at that time.
Yeah, that's a really, those are really great points and examples. I guess for maybe some of our, you know, for Agent Brown and Assistant Chief, what can people do to protect themselves? You know, I've heard anecdotally from many in different minority communities that, you know, they don't feel safe going out anymore. They feel they are scared because of these random acts of violence against them. And, you know, many people have started buying and carrying guns where they are permitted or other types of weapons. I mean, one, is that advisable? You know, it's we hate to have to feel the need to do that, but what are some other ways that we might be, we can prepare people and have, so they know that they can better protect themselves? Maybe let's start with Assistant Chief.
Sure. You know, it's everyone's right to bear arms. That's everyone's right. And the police department is, you know, we're not going to, you know, get involved in that discussion. That is everyone's individual choice. What I say is very important is be aware of your surroundings, know where you're at, and you should feel safe in your community. That is a very, very basic right. And if you don't, then you need to call us. If you feel threatened, scared, upset, you feel like something has happened, please give us a call and we will look into it. Everyone has that basic right to feel safe and secure in their community and their neighborhoods. And all the comments that I've heard prior is, you know, for other folks to get involved. That's very, very important. Just don't stand by. Don't be a bystander. If you see this type of behavior going on to anyone, don't, you know, try to support people. But just be aware of your surroundings, and you have to tell us. If you're scared or feel threatened or you don't know, please let us know. If it's an emergency, we will respond. We will get there. If it's something that happens after and you have questions and you don't know exactly what your rights are, what you're supposed to do, please give us a call. You can call the non-emergency number and we can have someone contact you or we'll come out. But the big thing is just be informed of your rights, know your surroundings, and everybody has to step up to help one another.
Man, I'll just add to what Colonel McClinton said, and he's exactly right. And just to reiterate something Michael just said, you know, a lot of times we seem to easily put this back on the victims, but you know, for the rest of us in the community, in most of our cases, there's always someone who saw something, heard something, something didn't feel right, but for whatever reason, they don't come forward because, you know, in hindsight, they wish they had. You know, AME church shootings that I investigated is another great example. There were people in his sphere that could have prevented it, and that's an important part of it. You know, a lot of what we have reported to us is, you know, falls in the category of free speech, but we really want that reported to us anyway, because, you know, a lot of the hate rhetoric can be precursors, while legal, can be precursors or building blocks to a larger problem that when we're trying to connect the dots to disrupt a major violent offender or domestic violent offender, domestic violent extremist, we can do that.
Right. And, you know, just kind of going to this more preventive, raising awareness. Let's talk about the education around this. You know, many people today who's joining us, like like we said in the beginning, may not be aware of all of the options. You know, what are the different levels? At what point do they do they report? All of this education and raising awareness about the issue and how to deal with it. What kind of programs are there in the community to help this along, to raise awareness? Are there any initiatives that you have in your various agencies to better educate, to inform the rights and resolve conflicts for the Asian community or any minority group? So if we want to get started with, let's see. Joel, do you have, what about the Asia AIC?
Well, Xiaoyan, thank you for directing that to us. Actually, Sabine and I, with the Office of Globalization, along with some partners with the University of Louisville, have just since the Atlanta area shootings have really noticed that there has been a need within the community to have such a task force or such an education component. One thing I have to say is we have recently, since the past 5 years here at Asian Institute Crane House, within the Asian communities, we have worked very much in silos. We work with our own communities, and we're really being intentional and hoping to start a task force within the Asian communities for us to have a safe place, a voice, possibly every other month, inviting law enforcement or other members of the community on what to do if encountered with such cases. So yeah, we've heard a need for that, and we will address it. And we are looking at creating an AAPI task force. And that's something we're definitely looking at and being intentional. And also another thing I'd like to direct everyone to is, you know, we talk about reporting, but you know, in cases of trauma too, when people have encountered these incidences of hate and where to turn to, as a past employee of Metro United Way, you could always look into the resources of Metro Call 311. If you feel like there's a place that you need to turn to, just always know that you could dial 311, which is a service through Metro United Way here in Jefferson County, and find those resources. But yes, I do have to say that our communities have been pretty much siloed recently, but of course it takes a tragedy for us to notice what the issue is. And I'm very much honored by the unsolicited support that I've received from the community, not only the Asian communities, but also other community partners, the LVA, Actors Theater of Louisville, the Jewish Federation. It's all unsolicited, and it just makes me very proud to be a Louisvillian, and very, very, very much ignites us to start the conversation and start the intentional act of creating a task force for our community. We may be small in numbers, but we will be strong once we're together.
That's a great message, Joel. And as we've seen today, you know, everybody here, at least on the panel, is very much ready to provide any kind of, to speak to any of the communities, to come in and give the same type of, you know, whether it's trainings perhaps, or, you know, workshops about, you know, what to expect, what to do. And also, I think yesterday when we talked about, we're at 0 cases right now. Let's keep it that way, right? What can we do to make sure that case that number do not go up?
And I do want to correct myself. Thank you, Jody, so much for correcting me. I get my numbers mixed up. That's something you'll know. I call people by different names, but it is Metro call 211. So I do apologize. Thank you.
And we'll provide some those numbers and some follow-ups for people to refer to. So before we're going to go to Q&A very shortly. We're actually right on time. Before we do that, I just want to give everybody a minute to share any final comments, thoughts that you have that you didn't get to mention during this course of conversation. And then after that, we're going to go over to some of the excellent questions we have received so far. So why don't we go ahead and start? Let's start with Rachel Anger from HRC.
I felt like you were going to pick me. I just want to say that in order to eliminate illegal discrimination of all kinds, it's so important that we have the opportunity to enforce the laws that are in place to protect people. And we can only do that if people come forward. If you report every time, we'll have a more accurate picture of what's really happening, what kinds of discrimination are occurring. And with that information, lawmakers and organizations like all of ours that we work for every day can allocate more resources where they're needed so we can make the changes that we need for our city.
Great, thank you. Special Agent Brown?
Yes, I just want to sort of emphasize again some stuff that Joel said about the trauma and the impact on the community is something that can't be overstated. But, also the Asian community are often victims of human trafficking, which is a whole other topic, but it is something that we need to be addressed. And I'm going to put in the comments link a link to our Citizens Academy. So we try to do a Citizens Academy twice per year. It's a micro way where the community can learn more, a deeper dive into everything that the FBI investigates, but specifically hate crimes. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Michael, do you have any thoughts you'd like to share?
Sure. There's really a much deeper work to be done, as a society to reduce racial discrimination across the board. Some of that can happen through policy change, but the more challenging work is really more personal. We as white people have to challenge our assumptions on how systems work, because historically many systems are set up to benefit one group over another. And we have to understand our own privilege before we can truly implement like a vision for equity. And I'm really talking about systems like big and small, everything from our justice system to policing to corporate, as well as nonprofit environments like my own. We have to really stop and look at the systems that we've inherited and say, are they truly equitable, or are there ways that we can think about these differently in order to create a better society and more opportunities for everybody?
Yeah, thank you. Jody?
Thank you so much. I'm just going to throw out numbers again. We've got our Metro United Way with 211, and Metro 311 really partners with United Way, so we can get information to our community no matter what it is. 311 and 911, please don't hesitate to call, especially if something is happening and it's an emergency. We are there for you.
Right. Lieutenant Colonel McClinton?
Yeah, just I think to clarify, just so everyone is clear, if you feel like you've been discriminated against, or if you've been any of this has happened to you, it's okay if we respond and say, well, this is not the case, or we might very well respond and say that is the case, but don't feel like you're wasting our time or wasting your time. If you don't know, then ask us, and we will respond and we will answer your question. And a lot of stuff that I have talked about today, kind of our policies, the law, everything that we look at, that is all in our standard operating procedures. And that's all available in our open data portal. So if anyone has a question or doesn't want to ask, or they don't feel comfortable calling, you can look at our policy. A lot of the stuff I was talking about, I was reading directly from our policy, and that's all on our open data portal. It's on our website. You can get to it. it's under our standard operating procedures, and it's under hate crimes. And then that way, if you don't feel comfortable, which I want you to feel comfortable contacting the police, contacting Metro Safe, but if you don't, you can kind of go in and look for yourself and see, okay, here's what they're looking at, here's what they're going to do. But if you feel like I can't answer that question for you, a detective can't, but if you feel like you have, then please call us and we will look further into it.
Great, thank you. Sabine, do you have any last minute thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Cheyenne. And thank you all the panelists for being here. And one of the things that I would think, or a couple of things that was going through my head as we were all listening on such powerful conversation. And one of the things I'd really like to vocalize is, we've talked about system change and changing our system and changing that mentality and changing that thought process. I think there was somebody who made a comment about the majority needs to stand up for equality. And I would absolutely echo that. And I would even challenge it even further and say we all need to stand up for equality. Every single one of us. Michael, you mentioned this is a personal journey. And I think I would absolutely agree with you that we all need to see this as a personal journey for ourselves in advocating for equality. And when we look at systems change, one thing that I would love to vocalize is when we talk about LMPD and we talk about FBI and we talk about those types of systems, we also want to talk about them being representative of the demographics of our city. And one of the things that I know that the Lieutenant Colonel and I and Chief Shields and I have talked about, the mayor and I have talked about, is diversifying that force, diversifying that staff so that it is indicative of the demographics of our city, so that we are seeing more Asian Americans on the force. So we are seeing more Blacks and African Americans on the force. So we are seeing more Middle Eastern on the force, so that they are there to understand and walk those shoes, and they are able to talk to their colleagues, and they are then able to talk to the community. And we are together growing as a city and as a community. And so if I had a request, it would be to talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors, talk to your kids, talk to university students, and encourage them to be part of this community, to look to the force, to look to the FBI, to be a really good citizen for our city, so that we can move forward united in healing and really changing that mentality, changing that system, so that we are together and that personal way moving forward. But those would be the 2 cents that I would have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I say one more thing?
Yes, please.
I love what you were saying, Sabine. It's, we're all in this system together. And if we're going to change the system and see the change we want, we have to work with the system and within the system and get involved. And there are so many ways to get involved. And I just want to mention that if anybody's interested in getting involved, you don't have to work directly for Metro to make a difference. We have volunteer opportunities, boards. There's hundreds of boards and seats available for people to come in and volunteer their time and make a difference with our many agencies. And we do have a seat open on our advocacy board. If anybody is interested in that, if they can contact our office if you're interested in serving the Human Relations Commission.
And Jayan, I would like to add to that. One thing that you start noticing in our community is that empowerment doesn't really happen until representation starts happening.
Mm-hmm.
So with the executive directors of the corporations here in Louisville, and also with the nonprofits, look at your board. Look at who comprises your board. Look at who's helping create the decisions and moving the direction of your organization. A lot of this change doesn't really happen until you start seeing the representation in your own leadership. Mm-hmm. So like I say, it's nice for me, one who likes to watch a lot of television, to see a lot of my people being represented in the big screen and in the small screen. And I think that starts creating the sense of normalcy for us when you see that representation. So very similar to Rachel, the Asia Institute Crane House has a few number of committee positions and board positions available if you want to help shape the direction of our organization here in Louisville. Thank you.
Yeah.
Just to add on there, Joel and Sabine and Rachel, you're right. And a testament to that was just the sheer number of volunteers that that I witnessed at the Broadbent Arena, helping with the vaccines. I would just like to take an opportunity. Before the meeting, I looked at the percentages of Asian Americans that are in the FBI, and of the 37,000 employees we have, only just barely over 4%. And so that's not a good number. Asian Americans represented. So on August 25th, it hasn't been released to the public yet, but on August 25th, we're holding a diversity agent recruiting event here that hopefully we'll have most of that in person. And I know LMPD is obviously in need of recruiting, and my conversations with Chief Shields and Colonel McClinton, who I do support. You're right, Sabine, law enforcement does need to be reflective of the communities we serve. And I think part of that is just lowering the barriers of mistrust, and on our part to explain, what it is that we do. I think this last year and a half has shown that, we all have a lot of work to do. There's a lot of people in the community that we took for granted. They knew what we did, and just to let them behind the curtain. So that's what we're going to try to do on August 25th.
Great. Well, thank you all. I think everything you've said is we need to have a lot more intentionality in whether it's recruiting or representation. And that's going to take everyone to make sure that they prioritize this as something that is important to all of our respective agencies and groups that we lead. So with that, I'm going to go to a couple of questions we have. And I know we had a lot of comments in the chat, and may not be able to get to those, but I've noticed that a lot of people have, our panelists have been responding to that. And again, we will be sharing some of this after the event. So one of the first question we had is, we all know that representation matters, and yet, as the slides presented by Mr. Buno show that the number of Asians in the Louisville area is quite low. This question is directed to the two government entities. What training is provided to its officers, agents, to combat unconscious bias within those workforces? So I think that's going to be the FBI and the LMPD.
Andy, I'll start off. At our training at Quantico, every agent and analyst is required to go to the Holocaust Museum and the Martin Luther King Memorial, and there is significant training. And then yearly we have legal training, and part of that legal training is the unconscious bias piece.
And then with LMPD, all of our recruits go through sensitivity training. They go through this hate crime training. They know this policy. They're trained in this policy. We've been doing implicit bias training for well over 10 years. So we go through all of that training. Our recruits go through that training, and we are mandated by the state to have in-service training every year. And typically we cover something in regards to bias, implicit bias. And so we do receive training in it. And I think our numbers right now, Louisville Metro, I think we're about 1.8, 1.9, I believe, is the percentage of Asian officers. And obviously we'd love to see more.
Right. We have a question here about bullying. Is bullying that are racially motivated reportable as hate crimes?
Yeah, well, yes, you would need to contact us. Like I said, it's any acts or threats of violence, property damage, harassment, intimidation, and that's motivated by hate or a bias, then yes, if you're getting bullied because of your race or because of your religion or because of any of that, yes, please call us.
Mm-hmm. There's a couple questions really around young people, I think. What this is impacting a lot of the young kids, Asian American kids in schools. Is there anything, do you have information, anything that might be, that's done in terms of education, in terms of awareness training in schools? I know, unfortunately, we don't have anybody from JCPS represented here, but is that a question any of you might be able to address? No. Okay, well, we can find that information. And I know that the the schools are they're pretty, on top of a lot of the bullying, there's several groups around that, and this may fall into that, but we're happy to follow up and find out more for you. And then just looking at the last question I have here, is there any effort to increase bystanders intervention training such as Green Dot within our schools or places of employment? And I am not sure who that would be directed to. Is anybody here on the panel? Nope. Okay. Well, good questions. Maybe we, again, something for us. Sabine, did you?
I was just going to say, I think I've had some experience with Green Dot when I was over at Berea College and some of the work that we've done with the Department of Justice. And I think that's really a great point, Wynn. I think you brought that up. I don't know of any training more recently that we've done here in Louisville. I did when I was with JCPS. I remember we've done some Green Dot training there. That was many, many moons ago, but definitely worth bringing back up again. And I love the point that was made about that Green Dot training for bystanders, for the audience, for folks in our city, not just our kiddos, but also for our adults. This is something that could absolutely be done with employee resource groups. A lot of our main employers and a lot of our corporations have those employee resource groups that we could be providing that training to. So I love that suggestion. And I made a note of it that we will explore that. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and I wanted to say in the beginning, I forgot to, but we have a lot of you joining us from across the U.S., not just in Louisville. So hopefully today, a lot of the things that we covered, although some of them they pertain to Louisville, but I think overall, if you need the similar type of resources, you can certainly find it in your own cities for this kind of conversation. So with that, I want to thank all of you so much for sharing with all of us with your information, giving us a much more informed picture of how the process would go, investigations from education to, the final resolution. So thank you for joining us, and I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to Joel to close us off. Joel?
Thank you so much, Xiaoyan with the World Affairs Council, and thank you so much, Rachel, with the Human Resources Commission.
Human Relations.
Sorry, I get that wrong. Know me, I always mess up my words. Thank you, Robert Brown with the FBI. Thank you, Michael, with the ACLU. Thank you, Jody, with Metro Call. Thank you, Sabine, with the Office of Globalization. Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel Andrew, and thank you, Christopher I'm sorry, I'm horrible in pronunciation. Gagin with LMPD as well. Thank you, Mike Mall with PNC, for letting us have this conversation. And thank you all who participated. Do remember that this session was recorded. Be on the lookout for a copy of that recording, and also be on the lookout for the other resources that we have. I know that the FBI has provided us a threat prevention guide in both English and in Mandarin. And also be on the lookout in all of our social networks here at the Asia Institute Crane House, the World Affairs Council, and with the Office of Globalization, as there will be another talk a week from now, hosted by the Muhammad Ali Center on the history of Asian AAPI hatred and discrimination. So please be on the lookout for that. And with that, I just want to say thank you for spending your lunch hour and a half with us. Thank you for learning the processes. Asian community, thank you for learning how to report these instances, and please, please, please do not be afraid to report if we should encounter anything. So with that, thank you all. Happy hump day, and have a safe week. Bye now.
Thanks, Joel.
Bye now. Thank you.